Just a note, this episode was written and edited in November. It's an episode about gratitude with an opening statement about where my mind was last month. And with the holiday season upon us and political tensions among us, this is what I came up with. Here we are in November 2024, and lately I've had a lot of trouble focusing on life, on work, on anything that is a part of my daily routine. For years, I've been saddened by the amount of division the country faces. I find myself continually reflecting on what needs to happen from everyone involved to make things better. And if you live in the U.S., well, then that means you and me, all of us here living together. I go from feeling anger to sadness to determination, constantly questioning how I can participate in making things feel better. But we all know better is a subjective term. And no matter how many emotions I cycle through, I still come up feeling empty and at a loss of what to do. I've been trying to remind myself, as cliche as this sounds, to take a moment and reflect on the things in my life that I'm thankful for. I'm not great at doing this. However, that gave me an idea for this latest episode. This episode is a compilation of gratitude created through the various statements made by some of my guests this season. To be clear, I've never specifically asked any of my guests what they're thankful for. These are things that they've said organically, things that simply just came up in conversation. At times, those who are sharing their story with me specifically use the words thankful or grateful. Other times, the gratitude is heard between the lines, in the tone or delivery of what they're telling me. But what I'm most intrigued by is that this essence of gratitude seems to be a uniting factor between all of my guests and each of their stories, even the guests that I didn't include in this episode. To each of you tuning in, I'm grateful for all of your support. Thanks so much for cheering the show on. Thanks so much for listening. This is our final episode of 2024. It's a compilation episode. I'm Katie Mahalik. This is Shadow Clock. A perfect place to start this episode is with Amira, my guest from episode 9, which is titled Emma. You don't have to read between the lines. Amira is explicit with what she is thankful for. To jog your memory, Amira is a former student of mine. It was after she graduated that she told me about her experience living on the streets of San Francisco, sleeping in a car for the first year of her daughter's life, all while waiting for a spot to open up in a woman's shelter. It was when that spot opened up that things changed for Amira and her daughter, Emma.
So I'm the first one in the family who has a college degree. So yeah, I am very grateful for that because the shelter made me basically to get my college degree. I'm not gonna lie to you, it was not easy. There were times I wanted to give up when things were getting harder, and I'm like, what is it I'm doing? But you can't do it. You have to believe in yourself. You need to have a drive for something. You need to have a drive. My drive was Emma.
Does Emma know you guys were unhoused?
Of course she knows that we talk about this all the time. She knows where the shelter is. She knows when I pass the spots, I stayed the night with her. I point out, I say, Emma, look here. That's where we stayed the night one night. It's easier to park. I tell Emma, you know what? You lived in every neighborhood. It's homeless. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Even when bad things happened to me, there was always, on the end, something good coming out. Even though I was homeless, I was abused, I was put down, I was not valued living as a woman, but it's just made me stronger for every abuse I took in. For every downfall I had, it made me stronger. I teach Emma there's less fortunate people than us. And I believe in you need to be good. You need to be good to the people around you in order to be happy, to be grateful what you have. So every night when we go to bed, what we do is like a ritual. We say thank you so much being in my life. Thank you, you came at the right time, you saved my life, and thank you, Emma. I could have not done this without Emma. I would do it again and again. I would do it again at the worst, just to have Emma. I would do it.
Sometimes gratitude comes after receiving priceless advice, and that's exactly what Bob Scheiblein is grateful for. Bob was our guest in episode 1, when the bars slammed shut. Bob had done a total of 9 years in prison for robbing banks, 5 of which were in Alcatraz. You're about to hear Bob talk about what it was like doing time in isolation.
I'm a rebel, so any joint I go into, I'm introduced to their whole. Here, 7 days is serious shit. You can put your hand in front of your face and not see it. Now, they give you 2 big hunks of bread and the water. The bread, you eat one piece, But the other piece you don't. You save that. Because at night, that the wharf rats, the water rats, huge animals, come out at night. Can't see them, but you could hear they're in the cell with you, slithering noises, but you can't never see the son of bitches. And that's why you extra piece of bread. You save it for the rats, otherwise they'll start eating you. They're nibbling on your fingers and toes. You don't go to sleep when they're around.
Long after this conversation with Bob, I found myself wondering how he even knew to save that piece of bread for the rats. And so I called him and asked.
I want to know how you knew and how everyone knew to make sure you saved a little bread for those rats.
I don't know anything about how other people did, just myself. But when they opened the door of that solid front, and just before they slammed it shut, somebody in a tier above me hollered, "Save some bread for your friends or your visitors," or something like that. And I don't know to this day who that was, but I'm grateful for him for the rest of my life.
On a more solemn note, I'd like to share a few words from Ted Wallace, a white American man who was swept out to sea while vacationing in the Caribbean. He shares his story with us in episode 2, titled 3 Strangers. It's titled 3 Strangers because the 2 men who risked their lives to save Ted that day were not only strangers to him, but also to each other. One of the men, Sven Hill Madsen, a Danish man, he died while trying to bring Ted to shore. It was Bale Shabaka Kaza Amlak, a Black man from the Caribbean and the U.S. who raced to a cliff's edge where he was able to pull Ted to safety. It's the gratitude I hear in both Ted's and Bale's voice as they tell me about how the experience affected them that really pulls at my heart. You're hearing Ted's voice first.
Yeah, I am a different person to this day, I think. Everything's so much more brilliant to me. Just everything, just flying birds. I have such compassion towards little things, little animals, I see a bug crawling across the floor. I don't stomp on it. I get a piece of paper and let it crawl on, take it outside. I'm here, I'm back, I've made it. I have lived through this. Life, I'm alive.
It wasn't just saving Ted that changed Bale. It was also the loss of Mr. Madsen that left him marked.
I think it definitely makes me appreciate connections with people more. Life is fleeting. Life is not permanent, and we are all here to learn our lessons and also to share that experience and be a part of other people's experiences. And, because every little thing we do has a huge ripple effect, whether we know it or not. And so I think it makes me live my life with more intent. Even if we don't see the string of events that led to that effect, they're just invisible to our perception, but there were a stream of events that led to that very moment.
Next, we have Diego Calderon Franco, a Colombian biologist who was kidnapped by the Colombian guerrilla group FARC. His story is told in 2 parts. The first episode is titled The Slaty Brushfinch. The second episode is called Birding for Peace. His story really highlights what gratitude looks like beyond just one's personal experience. Diego reminds me what it means to have gratitude for the well-being of others. Here's a piece of Diego's interview as he describes the moment he reconnects with one of his former captors, Omar, who was able to extract himself from the guerrilla group after the Colombian government signed a peace referendum.
One of the things is that I saw Omar and I didn't even need it to forgive him for being one of the guys that kidnapped me. I was just so happy to learn and see that he got away, that he's just having a new life and that he's blessing every second of his life that this war ended for him and for several other Colombians, and that he's doing something to just earn his money and his life, and he's just behaving like a normal, citizen. It's just beautiful.
While reconnecting, Omar and Diego had a conversation in which Diego learned a bit about what Omar was grateful for. This conversation was filmed by a team who was doing a story about Diego's experience with FARC.
Lo que yo aprendí se lo agradezco a algunas gentes que se llevaron allá, como ustedes. Ella la tuvimos nosotros retenida.
Omar says he's grateful to someone that his front, the FARC Front 41, kidnapped years ago, when Omar was 30-something years old. This woman was held by his front for almost a year. During her captivity, she taught not just Omar, but 15 to 20 other guerrilla soldiers. She taught them how to read and write, as well as other subjects such as math and spelling. She gave them an education that none of the soldiers had had access to before.
Y fue la primera profesora que yo tuve en la vida.
He says she was the first teacher he ever had in his entire life. As can be expected, the kidnapping changed Diego's life forever. Not only did he open a birdwatching tour company, but he's worked closely with former FARC members to help with their assimilation back into civilian life.
So what happened is that after all this experience, I do birding tours. I take bird watchers to see birds. I'm thankful for that every day of my life. But the beautiful part of the story is going back to Perijá with the guerrilla, with the guys that kidnapped me and doing biological expeditions with them and stuff like that.
In episode 3, I interviewed a woman named Crystal Saucer. She lost her husband, Eric, to leukemia. Eric was only 43 years old, Crystal just 39. The obituary Crystal wrote for Eric actually went viral. It's an honest, heart-wrenching, and hilarious masterpiece. I'm sure hilarious is a term many of you didn't expect me to use when describing an obituary. But once you read it or listen to it in our episode titled Leave the Light On, you'll get exactly what I mean. Because Eric was sick during the pandemic, it was hard for Crystal and Eric to be together while he was in the hospital due to all the COVID safety precautions. But thanks to one of Eric's doctors, Crystal did find a way. Here's Crystal talking about the last dance she and Eric had together before he passed away.
He'd been in the hospital for a long time, and Dr. Al-Kadimi finally found a way for me to get up there. And he was being as creative as he could be to find a way. And finally, they called in palliative healthcare. And palliative healthcare is not necessarily hospice, but it says we're on our way to hospice. And so he called in a palliative consult, and I got to go see him for the first time. And I just remember that moment of being with him and holding him. And then he asked me to dance. And so we danced to our wedding song that day in the hospital room. And I can't thank Dr. Al-Kadimi enough for giving us that chance to be together.
We have one last moment of gratitude to share from episode 11, Miss Fitz and the viral playground buzzer beater. This episode revisits a joyful moment that also swept the internet during the pandemic. Third grade teacher Kathleen Fitz, who's also a former Rutgers basketball player, promised her class a hot chocolate party if she could sing a full chord shot from across the playground. The shot was filmed, and if you haven't seen it already, you can check it out on our website. While the feat itself is impressive, it's the reaction of Miss Fitz's students that people fell in love with. As Miss Fitz and her students relive that moment, they remind me to be grateful for the smallest of memories that can bring joy and happiness.
I shot it. Everybody just froze and stared, and there was like a second of silence. There was this really interesting, it's almost like a magical moment of silence before the ball goes in the basket, and it went in. They went ballistic. We all ran towards her. We all started running up and down and screaming and shouting, and I ran up to her and hugged her, and we just celebrated. Everybody was really excited, and everybody started cheering because we got a hot chocolate party.
But Kathleen understands that moment was about so much more than a hot chocolate party.
I realized why it went viral, and it was the time that our world was in, and it was just such a happy thing to watch and see kids smiling and just having fun at school. And I think a lot of people saw themselves in those kids at school too. I also think separate from the pandemic, it brought back happy childhood memories for so many people, like a recess yard and games and, fun and laughing. And it was, I think it was really special for people to see the fun that kids can have in school and that they do have. We just always remembered it as probably the loudest and funnest time of our lives. Yes, that's a memory that I could never forget. That was a really special moment.
Shadow Clock is an independent, out-of-pocket podcast. If you feel so inclined to donate, head over to our website at www.shadow-clock.com and click the contribution button. All monetary contributions go to pumping out our next episode. This episode of Shadow Clock is created by me. Post-production audio is by Jessica Sturgeon. Kate Cosgrove creates original illustrations for each episode of Shadow Clock, which you can also see at www.shadow-clock.com. Music is credited to Pun5. Content contributors, composers, and individual song titles for each episode can be found on our website at www.shadow-clock.com. If you like the show, spread the word by telling someone else about Shadow Clock. And of course, by following us on social media. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Shadow Clock Podcast and YouTube at Shadow Clock. The more people who know about Shadow Clock, the more people we can keep sharing these true life moments with. Thank you to Alejandro Velez, Kate Cosgrove, Jessica Sturgeon, Adam Gould, Bruce Sibley, Matt Sorrow, Adam Zavaslak, Mary Brum, Miles Brum, Cindy Mahalik-Higgerson, as well as to those who have given a one-time or monthly monetary contribution. Your support continues to keep Shadow Clock going. A big thank you to our Shadow Clock interns, Shri Nalan Chakravarti, Ezra Vervelde, Brooke Gordon, Addie Krieg, and Tara Peterson. And for this episode, thank you to Amira, whose last name we've kept anonymous, Bob Scheiblein, Ted Wallace, Bali Shabaka Kaza Amlak, Crystal Saucer, Kathleen Fitzpatrick, along with your students at Holy Trinity School in Washington, D.C., Diego Calderon Franco, and Omar, whose last name we've also kept anonymous. I also need to thank Faye Planner and Tristan Martin, who graciously allowed us to use an excerpt of the discussion they had recorded between Diego and Omar, separate from Shadow Clock. And with that, Happy New Year, everyone. I'm Katie Mahalik, and this is Shadow Clock.